So hi everyone, merhaba. Thank you for coming here. It's really nice to see some people here. Yay! um, yes, so for those who don't know me, my name is Eirini Fountedaki, and I'm a curator based in Berlin and Athens. My curatorial practices deal primarily with the notions of belonging, placemaking, and feminism. And the medium I'm mostly interested in is moving image and audiovisual arts. So I've been doing this residency here at SAHA Studio since October, beginning of October, which has been made possible because of the collaboration between SAHA and SAHA Studio and ARTWORKS, which is a fellowship program based in Greece. Yeah, I would like to give you a bit of an insight of how I'll structure this presentation. It will have 3 different parts. The first one is more about past projects I've been doing so far, and of course I needed to select some because I have limited time, and I just chose the ones that are very relevant to what I was trying to do also here at SAHA. And the second part of the presentation has to do with ARTWORKS and how was my experience at ARTWORKS, the fellowship program in Greece. And the third part has to do with my research here at SAHA. So, yeah, so far my curatorial practices have been taking different forms and different shapes. So from exhibitions to film series to publications, performative reading series. Yeah, I don't stick to one medium as it seems. But overall, what I share in common throughout all these curatorial practices is that I mostly work with other people. So I either do collaborative or collective projects. So this presentation is in a way incomplete because, again, it will be just my own understanding of what I've done so far. It was interesting that I got invited for this series of talks, which is called On Residencies, because it very much resonates with one of the projects I wanted to talk about, titled Residing in the Borderlands, which is very much connected with this idea of belonging, placemaking in the context of Berlin. So, Residing in the Borderlands was a collaborative project. I started curating it together with my dear friend and collaborator Pia Chakravarti-Burtwine. And the starting point was that we were in Berlin and people were visiting Savi Contemporary, and there were many people who were complaining that they didn't have the material in German. So even though Savi operates mostly as a multilingual space with also guided tours in like various languages, not just English, like all kinds of languages actually, some people actually said, "Oh, I thought we live in Germany and not on an island." So they expected to come into the space assuming that they have linguistic and cultural dominance in a way. So we decided to take this question further and to use it creatively and ask ourselves, who owns the city after all? So our inspiration was Gloria Anzaldua's notion of mestiza, which means mix in Spanish. And it's our point of departure for creating this cartography of Berlin by watching films together. So Gloria Anzaldua uses this term mestiza to convey that being mestiza means being more than just the sum of one's part. That means that she's not just white or Mexican or Indian, but she's also white and Mexican and Indian. While this can be a confusing position, the polyphony of those voices and the precarity of it goes beyond those binaries of native, foreigner, man, woman. Anzaldua doesn't feel the need to commit to one identity, and also refuses to partition herself, not allowing people to cut off her Chicana-ness from her identity as a queer woman. Instead, she commits to making, quote, a new culture, una cultura mestiza, with her own lumber, her own bricks and mortar, her own feminist architecture. La Mestiza embraces the contradicting geographies of her borderland, a space within and between cultures, languages, and genders. So that was our starting point with Pia. sorry. Yeah, this is us. And our goal was basically to explore the medium of film, because we thought it's better to choose film as a medium to explore those questions, because we can create this common ground with people from various backgrounds, and in a way it has this democratic potential to it. So everyone can like watch a film, understand their story, and then talk about it. So we wanted to create this space for shared reflections. So we also wanted to avoid having experts to talk about films, so we didn't want to invite academics or film critics or even the filmmakers to talk about the film. We wanted to create a distance between what film we were showing and how the guest relates to it. So the guest always was invited to choose a film with us that best represented their way of moving through the city. So how they experience through their experiences, their histories that they've been through. So our guests have been musicians. For example, we had with us Ali Morali, who is a great Syrian violinist and composer, who chose to show Phil Collins' film How to Make a Refugee, and which talks very much about the representation of refugees in dominant media. And his response to this was, I want to compose, my language is music, so I want to compose and perform live the score that is going to be the meta-narrative to what the film tries to convey. So this was his contribution to the series. Then we also had Vaginal Davis, and she chose a great musical, Velvet Goldmine. We also had Ezra Karakaya, who also is a comedian, a talk show host in Germany, very much focused on like making visible issues around Muslim women, and she chose a series called Rami, and talked about the representation of women in the context of Germany. So this was, a series, as I said, that ran throughout the year. And we had other guests. I won't talk about all the guests, but sorry, I want to go here. And then another project I wanted to talk about is Sound in Womanhood. So we realized with Pia, we kept working together, and we realized we keep inviting mostly women, like what is happening? I mean, it wasn't like done on purpose, but it just happened. So back then noticed that, I think, and they actually invited us to curate a whole series on transnational feminism. So we wanted to create a series that doesn't like not necessarily have only activist films, like feminist films that talk about the political struggles, but we also wanted to present different realities across borders of women, and to also highlight their different realities. So yes, our starting point was the question, how does feminist filmmaking sound like? Because important component of this series was the element of sound. So sound was very much playing a huge role in shaping our understanding of womanhood, and it can also reverse those stereotypes on how we perceive a woman through a film. So the highlight for me of this series was a session with Jumi and the Ainju, who we invited, and she presented 2 films by Zainabu Eirini Davis. And she's an amazing African-American, actually, filmmaker that was part of the LA Rebellion movement in the 60s, but for some reason, as a woman, she never became really famous, and all the male directors like became superstars afterwards. And her films were a statement to us because they were really not so much known. In Germany, actually, they were never screened. But especially in relation to sound, it was beautiful, especially the compensation on the feature film, because it was playing with this idea of what a silent film is, if a silent film can speak in a way. So it was telling 2 different stories of 2 lovers in 2 different historical eras of Chicago. And in both cases, the woman was deaf. And then the sound was playing this element of expressing somehow her subjectivity or her emotions, or in creating this extra layer of what language could not do. So after the film, also we always try to have parties or DJ sets, so we did. And Jumi, who was our guest, did some DJing. So this is more related to a film series, let's say, what I've done. I won't talk about publications, exhibitions, etc. But I want to talk about cruising curators. So I'm part of this collective in Berlin called Cruising Curators that emerged out of the pandemic in a way. So we were attending at the time the biennial workshop called How Now to Gather. Quite funny because we could not really gather in the middle of the workshop. We had to stop and we shifted online. And then we somehow secretly, I mean, we were not allowed. We started to meet and we wanted to meet and read. I mean, yeah, we were a bit nerds, but I think we needed that connection at that moment. So we were meeting at our places and we were reading, reflecting, chilling, gossiping. And yeah, so after a few months, we decided, hey, why don't we do something with this? Why don't we do something in the public sphere? So we did. The first project we did was called Tracing the Ephemera. Actually, no, this was the second. The first one was more related to an exhibition at Cave. Sorry, I skipped that. And for that exhibition, we did a workshop where we also encouraged our participants to interact with us via postcards. So now you see, actually, we sent them postcards, and they had our address, and that was actually our starting point before we even started the workshop. So we exchanged addresses, and we wanted to create this intimacy and this contact at a time of a pandemic where we were supposed to do this online workshop. So for this workshop, we also read parts of Times Square Red, Times Square Blue, which is a great book by Samuel Delany, and talking more about the gay and queer scene of cruising in New York in the 70s. And it very much also spoke about this spontaneous interaction that people could have in the public sphere. So he was talking about how people were like interacting like with the person in the counter in the supermarket, or how people were like making out in the park, and stuff like that. Now, of course, this area that he was describing is super gentrified. So yeah, this was our starting point, and all this within the pandemic. Tracing the Ephemera, though, was a bigger project, and it was a series where we started exploring this idea of ephemera as defined by José Esteban Muñoz. So José Esteban Muñoz thought of ephemera as linked to alternative modes of textuality, narrativity, like memory and performance. It is interested in following traces, glimmers, residues, and specks of things. It is important to know that ephemera is a mode of proving and producing arguments often worked by minoritarian culture and criticism makers. So to his understanding, I think ephemera was very much connected to those realities that we don't see, but they are there. They are, on the one hand, ephemeral, but they keep being there. They're very much connected to usually minoritarian communities. So we invited different guests. We invited Jumoke Adeanju, who is a dancer and poet, translator and poet from Brazil, Angelica Freitas, performer and activist from Greece, Vasilia Kaga, and curator and art theorist, Christopher Weikenmeier. So each of them somehow had a different response to that notion of the ephemera, which I want to show you some photos. So it took a very different form. So I don't know what's happening with my PowerPoint. No. Oh yeah, here. So this was a session with Christopher where he chose a more slow reading style, where we literally read together certain texts that he has chosen around cruising and the idea of the ruin, how cruising is connected to ruins and architecture. This was a more reading session, let's say. This session was with Angelica Freitas, where she chose a play from this very famous lesbian scriptwriter, and she actually created groups on the spot, and then we improvised on the script. it was quite cool. And yeah, now we're working on some other, we are contributing to a publication that is going to be part of Florida magazine, which is based in Munich. Yes, so to wrap this up now, I would like to move to part 2, which is more about artworks and the art scene in Greece and how different it actually is from Berlin. I'm trying to navigate both cities in a way. So when I did this fellowship at Artworks, it was an attempt from my side to connect more with the scene in Athens, mostly. And I think Artworks emerged within the crisis, so at a moment where there was even less state support. So basically, the state just stepped back and said, hey, you private donors just decide what you want to do with the arts, we don't care. So Artworks at this point emerged and said, hey, we're gonna create this fellowship program. It is funded by Stavros Niarchos Foundation, a private foundation. And they don't expect you to produce anything. They expect you to just present your work. And then they organize a series of presentations where each fellow presents their work. Then they have a mentoring program where they invite people from the field to like mentor their fellows. And the categories are 4: visual arts, moving image, dance, and curating. So, yeah, in a way, because there is a lack of archive in Greece, actually, Artworks started to create another type of archive of the contemporary art scene. Also, EMST, as you may know, the Contemporary Art Museum only like a year ago officially opened. So Artworks has been doing this work already, in a way, and it's similar to SAHA in a way that it plays this, like, it fills in this gap of the lack of state support, and it comes to provide artists with, and curators with, like, a platform. So since last year, Artworks initiated the, I don't know if it was SAHA or Artworks, somehow they collaborated, and Eva Vasilamazi was the first curator that visited SAHA last year. So I'm on the second round of this collaboration. Yes, my experience of Artworks has been quite unique, not in the best way, because it was in the middle of the pandemic, so 90% of the things happened online. So I don't have any visuals to show you because I think you had enough of Zoom screenshots. So it was, you know, it was so cool to connect. We needed this connection, and our mentors, even though usually they're supposed to do individual sessions with each of us, for curating, they decided to bring us together and do some sort of experimental workshop. It was interesting. Yes, so now I think I can move to what I've been doing here. Oh, sorry. Here. So, exactly. So when I came here, I had some curatorial intentions. So I wanted to explore more how feminist struggles and the feminist movements are somehow related to artistic practices, to what extent they influence artistic practices and women practitioners. Not necessarily being like, oh, I'm an activist artist, I only do feminist work, but more like indirectly and directly how someone can find those traces in artistic practices. But of course, my intentions were pretty open to change, and because I also wanted to learn from the context. I felt I didn't know enough about how the scene was here. I only knew through some people who were based in Istanbul, but they migrated to Berlin, so I knew only from their impressions how things were politically here in Istanbul. So yeah, so I started to do all those meetings with, I love meetings. I love having long meetings with people. And that's how I get to know artists and like their work and their personalities as well. So I started meeting with many artists, women artists, and I wanted to like just know their perspective, how they think, also how they think about feminism, but also how they work, what is their methodology. So throughout those meetings, I realized that feminism actually doesn't work the same way as in other countries of the West, because For example, with this talk I had with Zeyno Pükünlü, she was saying, hey, it's so much different than Greece even, or even Germany, how feminisms take form here, because they're not just about feminism and women's rights. They're very much connected to the question of the environment. They are also pro-migrants. They are anti-war. They also stand with the Kurdish communities. So it's way more than just reproduction rights and legal rights. That maybe in Greece, actually, that's what happened. In Greece, in the 70s, with the new government of Papandreou, basically he gave everything to the movement that they were asking. So all the legal rights that women wanted, he just gave it to them, and then somehow the movement got kind of evaporated, and so it didn't have the same thing as here in Turkey. It wasn't at all the same case. Or, for example, through my discussion with Larissa Aras, she was like, yes, of course, feminist publications. It was also, Greeks and Armenians who first did it even before the start of the Republic. During the Ottoman era, it was actually the first magazine for women was published by Efrosini Sarmarzidou, who was a Greek living in Istanbul. In 1845, it was the first edition. And also, there were many other publications. For example, this one called Heirin, I think in Armenian it means Armenian woman. Oh, I have some photos here. Sorry, forgot. So, I was really this is the Armenian one, and this is the Greek one. So they were all published in Istanbul, actually. And distributed, I know about the Greek one, it was distributed in Greece, in many places in Greece, so it was very important for the time. But yeah, all this is like work in progress for me, so I'm just sharing with you what I've learned, but I'm sure there are more things that I can learn from those publications. And another thing that I wanted to bring up here today was the fact that while wandering around the city, and this has always been a source of inspiration for me, I've been seeing all those invisible histories in a way that are still there if someone looks closely, but you have to look close and you have to know where to look, basically. So I wasn't expecting to find all those traces of the Greek communities in Istanbul here, and despite all the efforts that have been made to erase those histories, actually, I kept finding more like names of architects on the buildings, or like a hidden door that led to like a secret church, or small details like that. But also notice that there are empty buildings that belong to this community. Not just the Greek community, of course, the Armenian, the Jewish, and I think now they're used more as empty spaces, as if they are not part of like a general history of this community. And I was talking also to Sarah about it, the fact that I was really puzzled to realize that even the biennial is using this Central Greek High School for Girls. And if we read the description of the biennial, it says it was designed by architect Dimitrios Panagiotidis and built in the late 19th century. The school was founded to provide impoverished girls with an education, yet closed down in 1999 due to an insufficient number of students. So nothing else, and also the works are not that are exhibited there are not related at all to the history of the building. And this plus another exhibition I noticed that happened in Kurtuluş at the Kurtuluş Greek Primary School. It was a similar case. So I read the interview of the curator, and she was saying, yeah, I just was looking for an empty space, and this was appropriate because of safety reasons. It was freshly renovated, so it was good. So for me, that was very weird, I have to say, because as a curator, I always wanna consider the history of the venue I'm choosing, and also then the works I want to show somehow, directly or indirectly, need to connect to that history, to at least to acknowledge it, even in the description part, or to make these things visible. So my question to all this was, what role does curating play in shaping the memory culture of a city? Yes, so I'm going to try to wrap up now, because I know I've been talking a lot, but I wanted to just to share with you how, like, I think of curating in that context more as having multiple roles and responsibilities such as like taking care of artists and artworks, mediating between artistic production and institutions, and also making sure that certain histories are mediated enough, especially the ones that have been forcibly erased. And of course, in order for this to happen, one needs to spend substantial time to listen. So these past few weeks, I've been here for 5 weeks. I've been trying to like absorb information, and I'm still like letting everything like marinate. I still processing many things. And I'm sure that this is part of a longer process that just started. But I'm sure that kind of new friendships have emerged, and also I hope that new collaborations will emerge out of this period here. So yes, before I wrap up completely, I wanted to thank though SAHA and the SAHA Studio team, because through them I got to meet many inspiring people, but also I got welcomed with like so much warmth and care. So I wanted to thank Timoshin, Ece, Simai, Sarah, who am I forgetting? Sorry. But then I also want to thank the artists that were part of SAHA Studio. So Burcu, Can, Suha from Salon University, who have been very good companions here, and I've been feeling like home. And also I want to thank the artists with which I had conversations and that helped me shape my thinking, such as Marina Papazian, Larissa Aras, Zeynep Ükünlü, Pinar Urenci, Didem Erk, Nejbir Erkol, Sena Basos, Burak Delyer, and Bare Kabadai Dal. So that's it, thank you.